Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work at Milton Academy, an independent boarding and day school outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, college students faced costlier rent, food, even as tuition soars. Now, this is an article that appears in Bloomberg, and I wish I could pronounce the names of these two authors. Claire Ballentine. I can get your name right, and I'm going to absolutely butcher this lady's name, so please forgive me. But it's 22 syllables. Misyrlena, Egkolfopoulou. I tried my best, and it appeared in Bloomberg. And Julia's here. Hi, Julia.
Hey, Mark. How are you?
Great. So excited to talk to Julia about that. Our question from a listener is part 2 of my conversation with Lisa about why colleges routinely admit students with lower test scores and lower grades over students with higher GPAs and higher test scores. I kid you not, this may be the most important conversation Lisa and I have ever had on this podcast, so I hope you listen to that segment. And we also kick off a brand new interview you have been waiting for, some of you, for 2 years. It is with Justin Doty of Trinity University and Paul McGinlay, also of Trinity. The topic will be understanding how Division III athletic recruitment works. And it's part 1 of 4. We had almost an hour and a half conversation, dividing it up into 4 segments for you. So I'm excited. Julia's got an admissions tip for us today. Fire away, Julia.
I've spent a lot of time in Common App or looking at various college websites as my students ready themselves for some of the earlier deadlines. Maybe they're applying rolling or restrictive early action or just early action, what have you. And I have noticed over the years, more colleges are sort of adding optional things to their applications. Sometimes the optional things, if you will be like a video upload, 2 minutes about anything you like at all. Or Yale actually has, you can sort of upload a research portfolio, which can look like anything, right? And oftentimes my students either miss these optional items and then they flip out once they turn in their application and realize, oh my gosh, I missed that. Or there might be optional supplements at some schools. So we try to prepare our students for that. So I would say, don't just use the Common App in terms of what might be available for you to submit. You might want to go to the admission pages in terms of requirements. They will often put, if they have an optional option for a video or a portfolio of some type. So, and sometimes these schools only invite you to upload these optional materials after you've applied, and then you get a portal. So you have a finite amount of time of which to upload these items, maybe 4 to 5 days sometimes. So I would say look into the requirements and the options and make sure you ready yourself for those options. I do encourage, if a supplement is optional, I usually say always do it, with the exception of some colleges have now included, in an effort for access and equity, they've included questions that are about personal identity. So Duke comes to mind for me.
Yes.
In the last few
I know
years.
it's what you're thinking of.
Exactly. Yes. So it is lovely, right? This year, for example, and I think this was last year too, one of the optional supplements is about someone's gender identity and gender expression. And my students are so trained to do anything that's optional. I'll have like a fully cisgender heterosexual student saying like, oh, Miss Esquivel, like, I don't know how to answer this question. I'm like, no, that one's not for you.
I'm just laughing, Julia, because I say the same thing to my students, like, think like optional, do it, except for the Duke essay.
Exactly. So,
because that essay is like really not intended for you if you're heterosexual.
Exactly. So I always encourage to do the optional supplement. There has been some colleges that after you apply, they send you the option to complete an optional supplement. And so just check your portals, make sure you check the admission websites for each college. And it's also good practice for just in case you get waitlisted or deferred. Oftentimes the portal, they'll give you sometimes an optional or an option to upload new material and whatnot. So it's good practice anyways to be checking your portal and see what you're allowed to upload that's optional. Now, don't get too over zealous, as we have a saying in our office that the thicker the file, the thicker the kid. If you think
that one's been around since I started admission, so it's been
there you go.
To survive the test of times.
Yeah, it's a good one. And one of my favorite answers to that, a student said, "What does that mean?" after I said that to them. So I was like, "Yeah, right." So obviously, if it adds to your application, I do think the optional pieces are great, but do not bombard the college because they've given you an opening with a bunch of things that might just be excessive. They might not be able to read it. And also it doesn't always land well on admission officers when you're sending a bunch of extra material that's really not necessary or doesn't add anything to your application.
Julia, I'm so happy you gave this tip because it's actually really, really, really important. A couple of things you said that are really important. One is don't only rely on the Common App, but go to the school's website. And the other thing is people do need to know that there are schools that once you hit submit, then it asks you to do something else that wasn't in the Common App that only happens once you hit submit, which is another reason why you don't want to be doing this at the last second.
Exactly.
I won't say it's a super long list, but it's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, why would they do that? Well, it's the same reason why when you're looking at your college-specific essays, you have to look in a few places for them. Right? You go on the Common App and it says this school does not offer a writing supplement. So you think I'm good. And then you go under the application admissions questions tab.
Yep.
You start poking around and then you find, a 200-worder here. Well, and for the longest time I was like, this is ridiculous. And then it kind of dawned on me. I was at a presentation from a college and they said that when they were putting their question under the writing supplement, they would notice 8% of people weren't completing. And then when they tucked it in under the application question, they just completely fixed their non-completion problem overnight.
Wow.
So the Common App, it's a member organization, and part of their membership they're serving is the colleges. So if the colleges are saying, look, we really, really want to ask this question, but we don't want to see people not complete, so we can tuck it in here and get it done, then they're going to respond to that.
Yep.
So that's why you get these questions tucked in under the application question, even that it says the school does not have a writing supplement. Well, that same logic can apply to the portal, right?
Yes.
Go ahead and submit. By the way, I don't know if you notice, Amherst has something this year where once, you have to go ahead and submit before you get access to a question. Have you noticed that?
I actually haven't yet. So that's great.
Yeah.
It's a good thing I talked to you.
Yeah. And so the same logic, like, okay, if we put too much on the front end, you may not do it. But once you've done it, if you find out there's a little extra, you're not going to quit now. You're all in.
Right.
So awesome tips from Julia. And admission vernaculars, the word low admit. So low admit sometimes refers to going through a rating system, and your view is that you vote to admit, but you it's another way of saying it's an admit, but a weaker admit. Like I could be persuaded to change my mind. It's a low admit. Have you ever come across that term at all in any of your dealings, Julia? Because some of these are like inside baseball that a few offices use and others don't.
I haven't heard that exact term, but I've certainly had other terms that get at just that.
Now, you knew what I was talking about right away.
Yes, exactly. So in both schools I work for in committee processes, you kind of go through your top 1% of those folks. So those would not be low admits. And then a lot of colleges do what's called pull down. So you might go through and admit everyone you hope for, and then find out, oh, dang, we definitely have over enrolled here. And if you are a low admit, you might be the one that's snatched out of the pool and maybe waitlisted or whatnot. But I will say this, if you are maybe a low admit, depending on the college, you might be the first person they go to on the wait list, or one of the first few people, because you were in the class, you were barely there, you almost got it. So I know when we used to go to the wait list, we would often get those kids first off of the wait list.
Yeah, because, it's funny. People don't see this, but you could be in, meaning you're about to get an admit, and then the class has to go through a shaping down process because dean or some senior level person says anything from we've over enrolled or we don't have enough like boys from the Midwest or whatever. And then the shaping process happens, and then someone who you thought was in moves from into the wait list. The student never knows that. They just got a wait list letter, but they don't never know how close they were. And then they could get, like you said, be prioritized and maybe get back in again, potentially, if there's interest. And so all that is part of how the sausage is made, and nobody ever sees it.
Right.
And I know there have been admission officers that I wished we could let them know how close they were. They were so close.
Yes. Or sometimes you're the admission officer that cries when the rest of the team decides, this is a low admit. You're like, no.
Yeah, I don't think the public knows how we can get attached to kids through reading their stories.
Big time.
And reading what teachers say.
Big time.
And Will can be in there literally really sad.
Yes. There's a lot of
this
crying.
is like the norm. It's not like, oh, that's the sentimental one on our team.
Exactly. It really is. We used to have so at Haverford, it is a Quaker process, right? So every student comes to the committee table. It doesn't matter if you're the worst high school student we've ever seen. We will tell your story and talk about it. And so therefore you can everyone in the committee room gets to know a student, and we would get in debates and fights, and there were tears and throwings of paper. And, you can get real angry if people are not on your train to admit that student.
Awesome. So that's something that we probably should explore more at some point. That's why, it's so important that your application is one that emotionally connects. It needs to, if your regional admission officer or whoever else, second, third reader, if they don't like you, they're not going to advocate for you. They're not going to get excited just off numbers.
Right.
Right. I've been trying to talk more about this, the Tufts use the term data and voice. Like the data, that matters. The numbers, whether that's the grades or the curriculum or SAT, ACT, AP scores, grade trends, stuff like that. But it's that voice piece, and that voice piece, and that's where the emotional connection occurs, right? All of the writing that the student has, the student voice in the file, certainly what the recommendations say about the student, really powerful. Schools that have interviews, those write up notes. Wouldn't you say, Julie, it's those pieces that where the emotional connection occurs that make you say, oh, we have to have this kid on our campus?
Absolutely. And my colleague Amy, again, I'll quote her. She always says, and so most of those times the officer has spent enough time reading your application that they will emotionally connect with you. And then they want to fight for you at the table. And so it could be even one line in an essay that I'm like, I love that. Or that's such a cool extracurricular thing they do. Or I also worked in the mall. I love that about you. Right. So.
And I'm glad you brought that last point, because there is an aspect of we all look for people like ourselves. And so when you emotionally relate, like you just said, I worked at the mall, I relate to this kid, there's that piece. There is, oh, this person would just have so much impact, and you get excited about their potential to have impact.
Totally. Even if you don't relate to that student. One of my favorite admits was, I don't know if I've told the listeners this, but I'm deathly afraid of math and science. It is not my wheelhouse. And one of my favorite admits was a student I never met. And he wrote his essay about making a chocolate souffle, and he's never baked or cooked in his life, but he was a hopeful chemistry major, and it made me understand like how his brain worked. And even though I have no interest in majoring in chemistry, or I didn't understand the chemical properties he was telling me, I was like, this kid is so neat. He's walking me through his brain activity, and I love it. So even if it's not, maybe you're not related to the material, you do find ways to really connect with the student.
I'm really glad you shared that story because, sometimes I'm reluctant to say people look for people like themselves because when I've shared that, it really frustrates people. They're like, oh, snap. So if the person that reads my file is not like me, I'm screwed. And it's not that simple. It is true that we naturally have that proclivity, but it's also true that we have the ability to respect other aspects of greatness and other aspects of impact and excellence, even if it's outside of our wheelhouse.
Totally.
And so I think that piece you brought is a really important balancer that brings that, because I've noticed that I've shared that with people before, and they can get frustrated by that. That, you know what I mean? So if I'm not like the person that reads my file, I don't get in, and it's not, I'm trying to get that nuance. I want people to know there is a reality where we all naturally identify, but normally, every school is different, but in many admission offices, there's more than one voice chiming in to counteract that. And even if it was just only our voice, we're not so self-centered that if you're not like me, I don't want you.
Right.
It's not to an extreme. So you brought a good balance there. So thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Mark.
And our big number is 6. And you're like, 6? That's not a big number. Well, when I explain what 6 means, I think it might be a big number. So the new data came out from College Common Data Set where you can go in and see what schools have the biggest differential in admit rate between early decision and regular decision. And this year, the award winner, I don't know if this will surprise you, Julia, Dartmouth. The top school, and I'll say top, but the biggest differential in admit rate between the regular decision admit rate and the early decision admit rate. So they accepted 25.1% of early decision students, or 1 in 4, and 4.2%, 1 in 24, in regular.
Oof.
A differential of 6 times. And that's higher than any other school. If you want to know other schools that were crazy high, well, Julia, anyone come to mind? Well, who would you guess that you think would have a huge a differential admit rate between regular decision and early?
I might go with Williams College.
Okay, let's pull them up. To give me 3 guesses, and I'll tell you their numbers, and then I'll tell you because I think our listeners will find this interesting. So
yes,
otherwise I wouldn't linger here.
I'm also thinking Wash U. I know they are maybe dwindling those ED numbers, but with 60% or 61% admitted in ED, I'm wondering.
Well, so you're talking about something which is also important, which is what percentage of your class do you take?
Yes.
ED. And that's also here, but I'm going to save that for another day. So let's look at both of those. So Wash U had now the thing about this data is it's the class of 2021 or college class 2025. It is a year behind, but that's still pretty accurate data. So it's the kids just starting sophomore year, not the ones just starting freshman year. So Wash U had a 29.2% admit rate in early, 11% admit rate in regular.
Oh, that's better than I thought.
Yeah, so a 2.7 differential. And Williams, which you asked about, has a 33.3% admit rate in early, a 7.3 in regular for 4.5. That was a very good guess.
Oof.
4.5 times more likely to be admitted in early versus regular. That's good. That's one of the top ones on here. And take one more guess. There's at least one more that's right close to Dartmouth 6.0.
Ooh, I'm trying to think if
they would have been my guess for the top one because last year they had the biggest differential when this came out.
Oh, can I get a hint?
Yes. Maine. That's a pretty big hint.
A little Bowdoin?
No.
Bates. Colby. Oh, Colby.
Bates and Colby are right up there.
Yeah, I really should have thought of Colby with their very low and mid-rate and regular decision.
Yeah. Maine was a pretty good hint, though, wasn't it?
That was because we've got some options there, so.
Yeah. So this is data that Jenny Kent and Jeff Levy, they compile every year. They painstakingly go through this and put it all together in a chart. I've put it up on our website under recommended resources. I'll do it again because I think people find this fascinating. So Colby had a 41.7% early decision admit rate, a 7.1% regular decision, giving it a differential of 5.8.
Yes.
And then Bates, those were the top two last year. Bates had a 59.5% early decision admit rate, a 13.8% regular for I'll send this to you, Julia. You'll like this.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, 13.8. So they had a 4.3. So I'll mention anyone here that was over 4 because I think our listeners will find this interesting. So Barnard, 4 times the admit rate, 33.4 to 8.4. Bates, I just mentioned Bates already, 4.3. 4.1 was Bowdoin, which was a good guess by you. So all the main schools were like way up there for differential. And then Brown, 16% to 4.1. And then let's see who else is super up here that people might be interested in.
Maybe Chicago. I don't know if they're.
They hide their data.
That's what I thought. Along with Tulane, maybe too, who also hides that.
Yeah, we know the people.
NYU.
Oh my goodness, I've misquoted. Grinnell is the highest. Changed it. 7.0. Grinnell, I missed it. So check out, forget what I said about 6. The new big number is 7.
Ooh, wow.
Grinnell, 57.7 to 8.2.
I know.
Is that insane?
I do know the Grinnell staff was also surprised by that number. And they were all, actually, as much as most colleges celebrate increased selectivity, they were like, no, we want to be more accessible.
Well, this can be coming down from the business power sometimes. But Middlebury. So think about it. Here's a theme, Julia.
Mm-hmm.
What's the commonality between Grinnell, Middlebury, Bates, Colby? Right.
Yep. Small overlaps
Location.
with 2 rounds of ED, and a lot of those schools are competitive D3 athletics as well, where they do.
Well, the big thing that I was thinking was like what I would describe as more remote locations.
Yeah.
And most more remote locations, Middlebury, Bates, Colby, Grinnell, and need to lock people in or feel they need to lock people in to compete.
Yeah.
So Middlebury, check this out, 45.1%. That's pretty high for Middlebury, almost 1 and 2 versus 10.7. So I'm just going to give the others that are over 4. I'm lingering on this just because I think this will be interesting to our listeners.
Yeah.
Northwestern. Now, they've always been a huge ED school, but Northwestern, 24.3 to 5.1.
Yeah. Wow. I believe that.
Yeah, because they've and then let's see. I'm just going to give anybody else over 4. Did I get everybody? Oh, here's another one. Tulane, of course, you mentioned them. 31.4 to 7.6.
I even doubt that 7.6%.
Well, so here's the thing. And I've talked about this on an episode a couple Mondays ago, but effective next year, I don't know if you heard this, Julia. I just learned this at the conference, but effective next year, the only way applications are going to be counted in data is if a school can make a decision over them. So it's going to all of a sudden, the schools that are doing all those fast apps, snap apps, VIP apps, and counting them as apps, they're not going to be able to count them in apps.
That's all right. I like it.
Yeah. And so some schools all of a sudden, they're going to be, why did that acceptance rate jump up so high? Because they were counting all these people that weren't decisionable applications.
Yep.
So I'm really excited about that. So I learned that at the conference from Andy Borst from University of Illinois.
Woohoo. I did not know that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I just learned it very recently too. That's why I go to Houston.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty big development.
Totally.
Yeah.
Look out, Georgetown.
It doesn't go into effect this admission cycle, but it does go into effect the following admission cycle. So anyway, There's some interesting data here on EA too, but I'll maybe save that for another day. All right, I got hung up on that. Then that big number. All right, so before I transition to our article, what's new, Julia? What's new in the great city? I say Boston. I know you don't live in Boston, but you're so close. I call you Boston.
Yeah, we can always say Boston. It has been really actually lovely fall weather, and we have had a couple college fairs at my high school, and it's been so fun to see admission officers that I haven't seen for years. And it is so fun to look around that gym and watch everyone feel a little semblance of normalcy as they get to know colleges. And it's just been really like very inspiring and reminds me what this used to be like. And
sure.
So it's been really great. And so far the reps are not, they're feeling pretty happy to be in person as well. So I think everyone's just happy to be back together.
Yeah, and those of you may not know this, but Julia's an extrovert, so she gets energy when she's with people.
Yes. Totally.
And it's been fun for me too, because the travel all stopped. And that was the hardest part for me about the pandemic.
Right.
I lost all my college fly-ins, I lost all my fares, and they're all back.
Yeah.
They're all back. So what's new on my end is I committed to 2 big ones this week, which I'm super excited.
Ooh,
I committed to, I think I might have told you, December Fest.
Oh, well, that's the king of the best.
That's like the king of fly-ins, right? It's like 8 days in December. So I'll be from December 4th to 12th. I've got my airline ticket. Super excited about that. Pomona, Claremont McKenna, Pitzer, Harvey Mudd, Scripps, Redlands, Whittier, and Occidental, and Caltech. So I'm I like ticket in hand. And then I also committed to the Northwest 5. That's March 4th through 9th. So Whitman, Lewis and Clark, Puget Sound, Willamette, and Reed.
Yes. Yeah, that's another good one too. That's a very good one.
And you know where I'm next week? I'm in Orlando at College Board for the full week. So life is good over here, Julia. All right, let's dive into our article.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
So this was I think it's a really important article because, when we've done our surveys of our listeners, we have listeners that make under $50,000, but not that many. It was like 9 or 10% in our last survey. And we can forget how hard college is for people who are under-resourced. And the article is called College Students Face Costlier Rent, Food, Even as Tuition Soars. So basically it talks about like kids are just getting killed out there in so many different ways, like apartments killing people, food killing people, gas, all of that stuff. They're taking on extra jobs. They're living in unusual circumstances. And I think it's really important that we're sensitive and we stay sensitive to how many people have food insecurities. Mm. So, the article, it starts out and it just talks about food, transportation, and then higher increased tuition, surging rent, and people are really, really struggling. So it profiled a few people. Ethan Powell in West Virginia, state known for its low cost, but taking out extra student loans to cover rent, which totals $1,250, had a terrible experience with roommates who wouldn't pay, forcing him to use his scholarship money to foot the bill. And it just sort of gives you the human drama of what people are going through. And then he already had a part-time tech job. Now he's going to get another one. And here's a quote. I always have to worry about whether or not I'm going to be able to pay my next bill or pay rent. Thinking about all those things takes over my head and doesn't leave me much room to focus on studying. I just want us, it's been a while, I think, since we've had an article that's really sort of forced us to live in the world that so many people live in. It talks about in June, Redfin came out with a report saying that rents are up 14% from the year before. And then it profiles somebody on North Carolina State's campus. I'm going to say something about that later. So first moved into his apartment, a student named Cole Persinger. In 2020, rent was $600 a month. Now it jumped to $850.
Oof.
And so that's a 40% increase. So he's had to take on an extra job to cover his ballooning costs. The 24-year-old who's studying civil engineering, he already works 15 hours a week at a Big Lots. Then he had to go up to 20 hours on weekends at an Amazon facility. And then he said that extra rent burden plus the stress is making it really hard. And quote from him, there are times I've just sat there and just felt so much pressure and stress because of the mounting costs. It goes on to say that the average cost for a public out-of-state school is $44,150, and for a private nonprofit, $55,800, and that's according to College Board, and that's actually, still 1 year back. Then it talked about schools who are making up for some of their lost money in the pandemic by having some big tuition hikes. In May, Boston BU said they're going up for 4.25%, their largest increase in 14 years. And Harvard, MIT, Duke, and the University of Virginia have all said we're boosting tuition. There's a quote from a student named Cynthia Hernandez who's living with her boyfriend in their apartment in San Antonio just because she can't make ends meet. And then the story I think that really caught my attention was a story about a student who literally went out and bought an RV. Her name is Astrid Allen in Houston. She's having such a difficult time finding affordable housing. She's attending Houston Dental Assistant School. She's an 18-year-old, and the cost of a one-bedroom, she couldn't get one for under $1,500 a month. So she buys an RV off of Facebook for $3,000, and now she stays in an RV park and pays $500 a month to be in an RV park, and it's actually cut her tuition in half. She's living with her 9-month-old son as well. And then there's a quote from her. It says, "Some people don't realize how much prices have gone up for the younger generation. All my friends are at this stage too, and everyone is having such a hard time finding things they can afford. I tell everyone, get an RV." So anyway, that's a summary of the article. Julia, where do you want to take it?
Yeah, I'm really glad we've been talking about this because even with some of my students, I have noticed a shift in trying to make sure they can find a school that guarantees four-year housing. Whereas before, I never got that question or concern from our students. And it's because they are very worried about affording an apartment, but it not just at NYU or Columbia. They're afraid of affording apartments in Indianapolis or Walla Walla, Washington, or so. And I think it's really apropos to a lot of what Daryl Edmonds was saying on his interview on the podcast, where your scholarship money might take you so far, but there's all these other sort of expenses that can really get in the way of your studying. And as we've seen, the increase in sort of depression and anxiety among college students is correlated with income and food insecurity and a lot of these folks in the article who aren't able to just be a student and kind of concentrate on doing that. There's a lot of hidden fees that we always try to warn our students about. So I always tell them to look at what's like a school that says they're a cash-free campus. So that might be a school that once you're on there, you don't need to pay for anything, right? So concert tickets or there's no such thing as student fees. Or maybe you're from California and you decided to go to school in Maine and somebody will provide you with a winter coat. Somebody will provide you with a fan for when it's hot in the summer. So all of these sort of things that might seem really simple, but these costs add up and can really get in the way of somebody's educational journey.
This article really hit home for me because I'm sensitive to this because I have a daughter in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know Joy, she's 23. She's in Raleigh getting her master's in clinical mental health counseling. We tried to strike a balance between giving her some skin in the game when it comes to cost, but helping her out, trying to do that the right balance. And I don't know, who knows if you get it right, you try. And so several things happened when she hit 23. One is, I'm not paying your gas anymore. You're paying your own gas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she has a Volkswagen Tiguan. So when gas was up there, her tank was getting over $90.
Yeah. Oof.
And prices have really gone up in the Research Triangle. so she was saying all of the students are so stressed out over money. Like, I don't know how people, she's basically saying, I don't know how people make it if you weren't helping.
Right.
If you weren't helping us out.
Yep.
We do pay her food. So, and I see it because she tries her best to not be like, first I was like, oh, Wegmans, there's a Wegmans in the area. I forgot how expensive Wegmans was.
Yes, I do love Wegmans though.
Yeah, I love Wegmans too. So, but she started out shopping at Wegmans, and then she switched to a couple other places. Harris Teeter. She likes this place in North Carolina called Harris Teeter. So I see it because she has a credit card, and I know that she's trying to be fairly frugal, but sometimes I'll be, $189 for one person? Like, I see it on the food side because I get notified every time things hit. But she was like, we're all stressed out. Now, originally, we gave Joy $500 toward her rent.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, that's first lease, then you're on your own. Sign a 15-month lease. So she did. Now the lease is about to expire. She's had a couple of bad experiences with roommates, and she's just one of these people that does better if she can have a single.
Yep.
Like, for her peace of mind and everything.
Me too.
So she's been working her tail off. She nannies to try to make enough money to keep this single. So then she was devastated when she'd saved up all this money, and her rent was first year. See if I can remember exactly. I just know it was $1,200 and something. Okay. Then when she goes to renew, they've gotten rid of the 15-month because she kind of realized, do 15 months and you lock in, and it jumped to almost $1,650.
Oof.
So she was freaking out. And so I just told her I'd help her one more time, and I made up the difference. And so I said, Joy, I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to give you $800, but this is really the last lease because after this one, you have your degree, you're working. And she started crying, but it was tears for joy, but it was also tears for relief of stress.
Right.
And so just what she reports, she told me recently, one of her best friends almost had a nervous breakdown the other day because the program is set up in a way where you're in full-time grad school, and then you have to have your internship and type practicum. And that could almost be like a full-time job.
Absolutely.
And then there's no money. So she gave up her nannying now.
Right.
And she's not doing any of that. But another one of her friends has had to work and is basically not sustainable to have like a 4-pay job, an internship, and be in grad school.
Exactly.
So like people are cracking.
Yes.
And so just through her, I just get a sense from her and her peers. At one point, she's like, this inflation is killing me. Like, how do people make it?
I don't know. I literally ask that question to myself every day, actually.
Yeah. So you live in that world, Julia.
I do. I have a very similar experience too. When I chose a grad school that was in Atlanta because that was far cheaper than New York or even Philadelphia. And then I got a rent hike in my, one summer, when I renewed my lease in Atlanta, I went from a $400 a month lease to a $745 a month lease. I must have worked because same thing. I had to do practicums, and like, you can't tell the person that you're doing your internship with or practicum with, oh, sorry, Fridays aren't good for me. I got another job going on. So I think I had at one given time 7 separate jobs when I was at Emory for grad school. Because it allowed me to work like 2 hours here at 10 o'clock at night or whatnot. And I'm lucky that was, as a single young woman, that was sustainable for me. But I don't know how anyone who is paying far more than $745 a month can do that. And
then you also had heavy loans too.
I got those big loans still. So, and that's the other thing, is that you can't save if you're trying to keep your head above water. And so then once you graduate, maybe you got that degree, but it will be a very long time potentially until I can kind of make up for sort of all of that money spent for school and then money I'm still spending on school.
Well, I just think this is an important conversation, I think, for all people, for people who, if this is you or this is your kid, hopefully you feel empathy if this is not you, people need to be in touch with this.
Yes.
I mean, I saw the statistics. I wish I could remember it. I used it as a big number once. The percentage of people that have felt food insecurity at some point in college.
Yes.
It was around 30. It was like around 33%.
Yep. And
don't quote me on that exact number, but I remember it being like right around there. And I know I shared it as a big number.
yes.
That's like huge. If you're someone who's never ever had to worry where your next meal's coming from versus someone that does, like imagine that level of stress.
Right, exactly. The community colleges around me, I actually live in a town with a large community college, and it was like something like 80% of Boston area community college students were facing food insecurity, and they saw a huge
Wow.
drop off in students taking courses. Just because, like, how can you justify like $250 on a course when you need to spend everything you can on your family or yourself?
Yeah, and we've had these conversations before on the podcast about college enrollment being down and how much it's down with community college population and with regional publics. And it makes sense because that's the least affluent population.
Right.
That's the population that, like you said, how can I justify paying this for school when I'm staring at food and rent and not getting evicted from my apartment or not having my car repossessed because I'm behind on a car payment? Like, these are like the realities, right? And so now I'm going to have a bigger expense. I need to go get a job with DoorDash or Amazon, or I need to start Ubering or doing something.
Exactly. And it's important too to know that, and my fiance talks to me about his story. So for the listeners, my fiance did not go to college and didn't get the opportunity. He was enrolled in a community college and actually then transferred into a 4-year state school, and then had his daughter and could not continue with his studies. And now it's been 10 plus years. And it's just going to be impossible financially and with his job and with his life to go back to school. So the amount of students that don't finish the degree, have a lot of debt, and can't actually return is really sad as well. Because that's sort of some of the worst place to be is you've got debt from college, but you couldn't afford to finish it.
Yeah. So what should our takeaways be, Julia, for our listeners?
I think it is a little criminal when we think about this, but we are asking students to sign on to sometimes very large loans, which you would never get in a normal situation. And also requiring students to really take on a financial literacy that they've not been prepared for. So I always, and I'll say this, I'll admit to myself, like my financial literacy is low, and I've had to do some education for myself, and I'm blessed that I can kind of work through some of the jargon and whatnot. But I would say use your state education financing authority. They are often the kindest people, and they can actually get on the phone and counsel you about how can I save some money in college? How can I are there some programs I can get on that would allow me to get free food every now and then, or get dorm room items? So they are often helpful in helping you budget your 4 years, and helping you find maybe housing that's more affordable. Yes, you might have some nightmare roommate situations, but it might not be perfect. But usually your state education financing authority is usually a good place to start. Sometimes they even have webinars and whatnot, but little things can actually add up. So we talk about this with our students, which is you might go to college and there's going to be maybe some privileged folks there, and they're going to want to go out to dinner every night. And while that's unfortunate that that's not your reality, there's ways that you can still participate without having to worry about spending a lot of money. And a lot of the time when students get into college, this is their first experience managing their finances themselves. And so there can be a lot of mistakes along the way. Credit card debt is huge among college age students. So I really think any of the webinars you can attend, or any some colleges will put them on themselves, but know your resources at your college. Check in with some of the financing authorities for your state as well, and you can get some good tips on where to save some cash.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to just a basic one, but it's really important. So one thing I enjoy doing every year, and I did it 2 days ago, as I accepted an invitation from 2 high schools in Sandy Springs, Riverwood and North Springs High School, shout out to both of them, to do a presentation for their parents. And I did it 2 days ago, and it's on Paying for College. And so I kind of walk people through everything I can in 30 minutes. It's so hard. I'm flying through the PowerPoints and then taking questions. And it's packed because it's Paying for College, right? Like people literally out the door, all 3 sessions. And one thing that I really try to emphasize is a couple things. One is financial fit. So that's going through a complete self-assessment ahead of time about what you can afford before you pick a college. You know, I share with them, my mom gave me 2 pieces of advice before we moved to Atlanta from Philadelphia when we were house shopping. She was like, 1, there's always going to be something bigger and better out there, so don't get greedy. And 2, set a budget and stick to it.
Right.
And that's how I feel about college. People overlook financial fit.
Yes.
And you don't do that for anything else. They buy a house, they qualify you. They check all from credit to proof of work history to looking at income statements and job and pay statements. They make sure that you can afford this.
Right.
Even for a car, you have to get qualified. College, which is usually people's first or second biggest expense, that's not how people don't look with cost in mind.
Right.
They just assume it will all work out. They look with many things in mind, maybe prestige in mind, or maybe like how much they like the campus, or is it going to be fun, or is it good in my major? Like lots of different things. We won't go over them all here. But they think that all the money will just work out. And then what happens is the school gets its hooks in you, or your kid. You don't want to let little Johnny or little Jane down. Oh, I got to let them have their dream experience. Oh, I don't want to be a bad parent. This is a mythology that if I don't let my kid go to their dream school, I'm being a bad parent. I tell kids, would you drive into Buckhead, which is the wealthiest section of Georgia, and tell your kid, pick out any house you want in Buckhead and I'll pay for it? Doesn't matter what the cost is. You would never do that, but that's what people do with college.
Yes.
So first I say, establish a budget and say you won't go over this. Figure out how much the student's going to pay and how much you're going to pay. Are they going to work? Are they going to take out loans? If so, how much loans? Are they going to work in the summer? Establish a budget and then educate yourself on the cost of college. Because I find the average person has no idea how much of their discretionary money is going to be taken. So you need to be running those forms, FAFSA forecaster, net price calculators on colleges' websites. You need to be writing that now. I don't care if you're a parent of a 6th grader listening. You need to know, because I'm going to tell you, you're going to be shocked to see what percentage of your discretionary money colleges expect to go to them.
Right.
It's 47% of after-tax dollars for a family going from $100,000 to $110,000. 47%. And so that's like not what people think, because you adjust your lifestyle to your income. I say the person that makes $50,000 doesn't live like the one that makes $150,000, doesn't live like the one that makes double that, $300,000. It changes, right? You live in a different place and you get a different car, and your eating out habits are different and your vacation habits are different, and your shopping habits are different. Well, the formula doesn't look at expenses at all. It's only income and assets. And now you've adjusted your lifestyle to your income, and the formula doesn't care.
Right.
It says it's not our job to subsidize your lifestyle.
Oh.
And so people need to educate themselves on all of this, so they know ahead of time what they're going to be asked to pay. And then once you figure out that, then you can figure out a strategy. Do you need to use a merit aid strategy? Should you be only looking at your in-state local schools? Do you need to go to community college for a couple of years? Maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe you can aggressively save and put money away so that you don't have to do that. But have a plan, know the reality of the cost, stay within your budget, and articulate between your student and you what you expect from them and what you'll be able to do. That's what I would say, because it's kind of that was my intro on my 3 sessions before we got in the PowerPoint, but because this is just what I've seen people not doing.
Yes. So do we. We actually ask, and when we first meet a student, we ask them to have a conversation with their parents or guardians where they sit down and do a net price calculator together. And I think sometimes very much everything you said, Mark, and also even and the parents themselves are like, oh yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But just like you mentioned, that's too late. And then now you're all sort of disillusioned with what your options are. So We always actually ask our families to think about a commuter option. And even if they're the wealthiest families, we do that exercise with them because it's really important for anyone to see just what the astronomical costs of college are.
Yeah, and a couple other myths. A lot of people just assume, well, aren't they going to give me scholarships? Well, one, a lot of schools don't give any merit scholarship money at all.
Right.
So it's only that need-based formula, which we've already said is going to take way more of your money than you think. And then a lot of times the schools that students want to go to, even if they do give scholarships, it's not easy to get them because they're going to give them to their highest performers. And people want to go to a school that they feel, is an honor for them to get into. And then those are the hardest, like take Emory. Let's just use Emory. Where you went. So, or Haverford. I'll use both the schools you went. Haverford, 0 merit-based money. Emory gives it to 4%. But it's hard enough to get into Emory. Emory's recent class had SAT scores of over 1,500.
Right.
The most recent class. So that's just getting into Emory.
Mm-hmm.
So who do you think the top 4% are?
Right.
Okay, they're kids that are turning down, the most exclusive schools in the country. So that's who's getting the merit money. So people just assume they'll get scholarship money. Well, they'll say, well, if I can't get it there, then can I just get it from like a civic organization, corporation, church, foundation, philanthropist? Yes, you can, but the amount of work you have to do to get it, most people don't have either the know-how or the discipline. I've had conversations routinely, Julia, with financial aid officers. I like to ask them this question. What percentage of your students come in with outside merit scholarships? Mm-hmm. And how much in general is it? So the numbers I hear range from 1 in 8 to 1 in 10 of people. And normally it's around $2,500 or less.
Yes, that's actually Amy Kirkcaldy in my office. Used to work for Harvard in the financial aid office. And she
Amy.
just mentioned that even at Harvard, so these are kids, who are getting into one of the most selective schools. If they came in with outside scholarship money, she never saw anything very big. Like maybe once in a while, a kid with like a $50K scholarship, but it's just like you said, Mark, like it really wasn't that much money. And luckily Harvard can give you a lot of financial aid, but that goes to show you just how competitive and how rare those large scholarships.
They're pretty rare. Like I know how to take people through that whole process and what they need to do, but the combination of the discipline it takes to do it.
Yes.
People self-assessing and knowing to aim at the right ones and not waste their time and go after the wrong ones.
Right.
And then the fact that the really big ones usually have a national talent pool and they're really tough. Like I had a student that won a $25,000 one year before last, but unique circumstance. She had childhood cancer. So we targeted like scholarships for cancer survivors. So she had a special condition. So she won a few like $5,000 and $25,000. But most of my students don't win like scholarships outside more than like those really large ones. Like sure, there's Dell, there's Ron Brown, there's Gates Millennial. Like they're out there, but you have to be really strong because you're usually competing with the national pool.
Right.
So people can't normally count on that. And most of them are 1 year, not 4 year, by the way.
Exactly, as well. So, yep.
So I'm not trying to be negative. I feel like I'm just a negative net over here today, but I'm trying to give a dose of reality. Like my view is I'd rather, like you're going to have to pay the piper later or now. So I'd rather you go in all of this with this foreknowledge.
Right. Agreed.
And so that's what I would say is like educate yourself. Educate yourself on what a college will charge you. Educate yourself on what your resources are to tap into scholarship. Now, merit scholarship money, there's a ton of it out there if you know how to apply to the right schools.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and if you're willing to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Great conversation, Julia. Thank you as always.
Thank you.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, Lisa and I took the question, why do colleges routinely admit students with lower grades and lower test scores over students with higher grades and higher test scores? We were going to make this just a one-parter, but we felt this topic was so important that we are making it a three-parter. And we're even bringing Julia Esquivel in on part 3. But in today's session, we have some very difficult and thorny conversations about social class. And we challenge all of us to look in the mirror and look at our own social class in this conversation. So with no further ado, Here's part 2 of 3. The last one, and for this one, I'm going to start out with Lisa, and we've never done this before. Starting with Lisa, we're going to finish with Julia. So Julia and I were talking the other day, and I'm like, what you said there was so good. Do you mind coming on and saying that? She's like, sure. So we're going to bring her in. So I want to talk about something we've been talking about a lot more recently, which is the whole idea of distance traveled or context. And one of the challenges that I see with students is they'll say, oh, wow, I got a 1530 on the SAT or 35 ACT. And they kind of think that they earned that.
Yeah.
They have no idea how much their parents and the schooling that their parents have provided for them for maybe going back to age 2 or 3, it couldn't go all the way back to preschool, has set that table to put them in that position. And so they kind of think, no, I got a 1530. I got a 35. You know, school is going to look at it very differently. They're going to look at it a lot more like, I'm trying an illustration, and sometimes they flop and sometimes they work. So this one might flop.
Don't be so pessimistic. It's going to be great. You can do it.
We'll see. So you know, I'm it's a sports one, so you're not gonna like it. But I'm at the basketball court, and I'm trying to decide who I want on my team. And I see that guy over there, and he looks so smooth. His jump shot is perfect form. You know, his ball handling, it looks like he's been doing this for 10, 12 years. And then I have this other person, and they're just completely raw. I mean, but they can jump out of the gym. Their speed is ridiculous, but they've only been playing for like 4 months. So from my standpoint as a coach, I might go for that more raw person, right, recognizing like you have more upside. You just haven't had your skills polished and refined. And so when schools look at it from a context, it's this whole idea of distance traveled. They really do look at what have you done with the opportunities that you've had. And that's why if they're looking, like if let's say they go into a school district and hardly any kids in that school district are taking challenging curriculum and the average test score is like a 17 on the ACT, and then there's like a kid popping at 25, they're going to be like, whoa, how are you like exceeding all of the context and the circumstances around you? You know, I was listening to Andy Boer's talk, and, you know, we often, you know, he's over UIUC's admission office, and we often talk about how calculus is like a prerequisite for all these courses. And he said, I can't make calculus that because 6% of Black kids have had calculus.
Right.
6%. And so there's a lot of people, he said, I want a diverse school. There's a lot of people who their school didn't even, you know, less than half of schools offer calc. It's not even offered, but there's talent there, but that talent hasn't had a chance to get cultivated. So I want to take that talent and put it in an incubator environment. Maybe I might have to require some summer enrichment, some stuff to get you up to speed. But if I see the work ethic, I see the intelligence, I see the drive, I'm going to nurture that and get you up to speed because overall you're going to help my community. And so that whole idea of distance traveled. And the reason I want Julia to come is because she's been doing a lot of work with Native Americans through a program called College Horizons. And she's got probably the best vantage point of anyone on our team at working with, you know, this is not what she does at Milton. This is what she's been doing for the last 14 summers, working with the program College Horizons that works with some of the most underserved kids. And colleges get it. Colleges get that. Like knowing what you've had to overcome in the background that you've had, we're not going to hold you to this other standard. Now I will challenge, and some people aren't going to like this. If you hear that and that sounds unfair to you, you're probably not in tune with how much your privilege has put you and brought you to where you are today.
Yeah.
And we all have to look at ourselves. Like my parents are college graduates. They're both teachers. I never for 1 second had the thought I wouldn't go to college or graduate. That's a totally different mindset than someone that's first gen. So thoughts, Lisa?
No, I absolutely agree. And I think a lot of times we don't really notice our privilege until it doesn't work. and then you're like, wait, but I'm always used to getting that thing. And then all of a sudden it doesn't happen. And I guess the story is that my family, that my son, even though he's 25% Asian Indian, he looks white. He's blonde hair, blue eyed. And the rest of us, like I'm a woman, Lily's a woman and Indian. Sonia is a woman and looks more Indian. And my husband is Indian. So we never got like that white male privilege thing, but we watch how people treat Thomas. And it's just totally different than how the rest of us have been treated. And we just kind of sit there with our mouths open. Like, how did that happen?
Wow, that's pretty awesome. I mean, it's maybe not always awesome when that you see that, but it's kind of good that you got a front row seat through your own family to see it in your own family.
We're a really privileged family. I'm just saying, I'm not saying we're an underprivileged family at all. I'm just saying we're not, there's somebody who's more privileged than us.
Sure.
And it's, if Thomas didn't have us constantly needling him about that, he'd never know. He'd think he earned everything that he got. And then people were like, I don't know why you can't do it because I did it. I earned everything that I got. And not that these people don't do a great job at what they do, but they don't see how much of a boost they're getting, like their whole life, all the time. So it's invisible to them.
Yeah, and I think that it's important that we all look at ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, how is class privilege impacting how I think, opportunities that I have? Because if you really, truly understand it, you won't really act like this person that came from different circumstances is taking my spot.
Right.
When you think they're taking my spot, that's an attitude of entitlement.
Exactly. You're never your spot, but I think if you don't, and that's really why I think it is good that you go to a college that has people from all diverse backgrounds, because, sometimes I'm just astounded at the things that people say. I'm like, well, how can they think that? And then I'll complain to my husband. He'll be like, Lisa, you talk from people from all different vantage points of all different financial levels in society all day long. And you have for 20 some years, like you don't, you're not in an echo chamber. These people are only hearing their own ideas reflected back to them. So they can't entertain any other possibility. And I think when you get into some of these, really highfalutin, very prestigious private schools, maybe that echo chamber is a little louder and people do start to feel entitled to go here.
Well, also people have spent a lot of money.
Yes.
And they want to feel like I didn't spend all this money to end up with the same college option that I would have had if I didn't spend the money. And that can also be true in the suburbs. It can be, I'm spending a lot of money for my property taxes. I could have saved half as much on the property taxes, but I moved into this paying these property taxes. I don't want to feel like I don't have better options than I would have had if I didn't pay the property taxes. So it's not just a private or a public school issue. But these are all the reasons. And the reason why I think this is important is because I feel like the mindset we're talking about, which is I cannot believe the school took somebody less qualified over me from a student, or if it's a parent, they took somebody less qualified over my kid. It's pretty prevalent. And I hear it a lot. It's pretty widespread. And anytime something's prevalent and widespread, I think that on this podcast, if it's related to college admissions, college life, college success, we're not going to shy away from it, and we're going to tackle it, and we're going to take it on, and so all of us need to look in the mirror. Like it's funny, and it's a very tricky conversation to have, because, for example, college admissions is mostly at the holistic side. It's social engineering. It's them looking and saying, how can we have as many different people around to create this learning laboratory so people can experience differences, so they can have their own suppositions challenged, so they can be more effective at both critical thinking and learning how to relate to people that they're going to meet in the real world. And that's kind of how they're looking at it. And it's tough, because on one side, I could argue it's tougher for Asian Americans or white females. And I could make that argument on numbers. Yeah. You could look at the numbers and you can make that argument. But then I could also turn around and I could make the argument, if you go to like the south side of Chicago,
that's tougher.
Almost nobody's getting out of there and going to these colleges unless they have class privilege. unless they're that person that lives there like Dave, but he's got class privilege. So is it really harder for you? Statistically, it's actually harder for them. That's why they're underrepresented.
Exactly.
So when you say it's harder for you, but yet you're overrepresented, that's actually kind of insulting, because it's kind of like saying, you know what, you have a head start over me, but I still pass you in the race. So what does that say about my superiority and your inferiority?
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And I think that people, again, they don't realize, like if you haven't spent a lot of time talking to people on the South Side of Chicago, and I dare say that most of the people who listen to this podcast have not, like you don't really know what's going on there and what sort of obstacles that they face. And yeah, like, will will Sonia have a harder time getting into college than Thomas? Yes, she will, but like that doesn't mean that she's going to face any of the issues that many of the people, who live in poverty, who live in crime-ridden neighborhoods, who have like a constant level of stress we're now learning that stress gets passed on in your genes. So it's like intergenerational stress. There's no comparison. Sonia's going to be fine, and these people are struggling. And I don't think that it's, we can just sit around and feel sorry for ourselves about that, I guess.
Yeah, and I try to look at myself, because a lot of times growing up in different circles I would be in, and people would sort of imply, and I'm speaking more middle-class circles, more predominantly white circles, people would be like, you're kind of, without saying it, they would sort of be like, you're kind of like a good black, like I would kind of get that. And no, but people meant well. But the first thing I would think in my mind is, if I had been raised very differently by a single parent, and gangs, bullets flying all around me, no jobs, no food, no good schools, no hope, no opportunity, like I would be a completely different person. So I'm kind of where I am because of the parents I had and the environment in which they raised me. It's really not because of any of my, of my own doing. Now, I'm not trying to say that I didn't do anything, but just even having parents to give you the confidence in yourself,
right,
to do things. And so I feel like that there's the lack of understanding of class privilege, and this is mostly class. Like some of it is race privilege, but it's mostly class, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do. I think that's right.
It really is what blinds us in this conversation to understanding, this mindset, and it applies to other things. Like, if we take race out of it, it's why these schools will go into rural. Like, I'll tell you, for example, in Georgia had to create a plan because they just were not getting literally any kids from the rural communities getting into Georgia Tech. Like nobody was getting in. A lot of times nobody would even apply. And as an admission officer, it can be challenging to justify even traveling there because, like, from a dollar cents thing, you may drive, 45 minutes to get to one place and hardly anybody shows up, and you can stay in a suburban region and you can visit 6 schools a day and get a whole bunch of applicants. So like sort of how can I justify spending a whole day and I may not get anybody? So they literally had to create a plan, which they did, which is if you're the valedictorian or salutatorian, you get in Georgia Tech. And that's the way that they tried to address that, to get more rural kids, because they just literally either they didn't apply or they would think there's no way I have a chance.
Right. Or maybe there's no way I could afford it,
Yes.
Kind of being like, just feeling like there's no one is there to tell them otherwise. Right. Nobody knows to tell them otherwise.
Yeah. But I imagine there would be someone, if somebody found out that you got in and you were a valedictorian, but you had a 22 on the ACT and a 1040, and there's a person that would think, I'm better than you. Why are you getting in over me? And not understanding that that's not how admissions thinks. You do need to be able to be strong enough to do the work. But look, when you see these top schools, the Stanfords, the Rices, the Northwesterns, the Dukes, they have all kinds of football players, Notre Dames, that have often very subpar test scores. But they can provide enough support and they can graduate. So context matters. And I just think that this is an important conversation, and hopefully it helps somebody. Anything else you want to say, Lisa?
No, I think it's a really important topic. I guess I'm wondering, like, in terms of what's coming up with the Supreme Court, where, it's likely in this next term, affirmative action will be overturned, how colleges will then use context. I mean, that might be a topic for a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah. I'll just say this quickly, that there's been about 20 years, more than 20 years now, it's been outlawed in multiple states. And so first thing you do is you look at the learning laboratory, like what has Washington done? What has California done? What has Texas done? What has Michigan done? California outlawed affirmative action in 1996, 26 years ago. Washington in 1998, Florida in 1999, Michigan in 2006, Nebraska in 2008, Arizona outlawed it in 2010, and New Hampshire and Oklahoma outlawed it in 2012, and Idaho is the most recent one in 2020. What are states that none of them like it because they feel like they could have a more diverse student body that would benefit everybody, and their student body's not diverse, but they've all tried different things. It's a hot topic right now in admissions because they're trying to find out what is even going to be legally compliant. What can they even do? So if you're an attorney with expertise in here, like, you're getting the big bucks right now because your phone's ringing off the hook. Yeah. They're definitely going to, one thing that I will tell you, that they will not give up on their quest to try to have a racially diverse student body. They will not, because they believe in their core that that's the best learning laboratory. Even a conservative state like Texas, they tried their 10% plan. Right? If you're the top 10% of any school, I told you Georgia did that. That was more targeted to rural, but it's still that's still an important component of diversity. And so schools have tried a lot of creative things. I think you're going to see language switch from race to high schools and neighborhoods. Right. You're going to see a lot of that. But I know one thing, they won't give up because they believe at their core that when you bring together people who are different, that's the best learning environment. And corporate America, I'll say this really closely, and then I'll close out because we still got Julia coming in here. But
no, we won't. We're not going to say it quickly. Come on.
Well, I was listening to this expert on corporate America talking about what makes for a successful executive team in business. And so they were doing all the business things that you would think. And then she said something that was really powerful. She said, diversity in your upper level executive team, and you have to start with it from inception. If you don't start from inception, it doesn't happen.
No.
And then what she said is, this is not about some PC, try to make everybody feel good, check the boxes, look how we look like America. She said, you have to have those different voices around the table or you're going to fall into groupthink.
Yes.
You're going to fall into groupthink. And so I'm going to give you were right. It's not going to be fast. You know me so well. So I was at a session at NACAC, National Association of College Admission Counselors. It's for independent college counselors. And it was about 150. And everybody was railing against school counselors and all the ways in which we're not respected, we're not seen as equals, and this, that, the other. And I felt like there was a missing voice in that room, and that is nobody's here to defend the school counselor perspective. So I stood up and I gave the school counselor perspective, And one of the points I made was, as an independent college counselor, you probably wouldn't like to find out that there was another independent college counselor working with your kid that you had no knowledge of, that was working on list building, doing all that. Well, that's how a lot of school counselors feel, especially ones that have been off and been trained. I'm talking about particularly in the private schools where they've done college admissions and they know this work and they know their kids and they have access to how their kids do. And then you may not like it if somebody's criticizing you with limited experience. And then you may not like it if you're making $1,000 a week as a school counselor and you find some local consultant in your area who's working with some of your students is making that in 2 hours. Not that everybody does that, but some people do. And I just felt like that voice wasn't in the room and we were falling into groupthink. Now, credit to that group. So many people came up to me and said, that needed to be said, that needed to be said. I'm so glad you said it. So I give people credit for that. But the point is, like, that's what happens when you fall into groupthink. And one of the things people need to be aware of about this is, how does this all impact college admissions? Because it's social engineering, if you're coming from a fairly homogenous region of the country, you need to know, like college admissions, they're not going to want to take too many kids that are in your same bucket from your same school.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is complicated because you might not be in the same bucket as somebody else if you're playing lacrosse, or you can play the bassoon, all right? Or other things, you might have some other hook, or you have an undersubscribed major that they really, really need because it's part of their program. Their institutional priority is to build out their data science team, and you're interested in it. So I'm not trying to just say, oh, white female from New Jersey, you're all the same, because you're not. But but everybody always uses Jersey for their examples because most people want to leave Jersey for college, so they're leaving the state.
I've never been there, but you've
never been in New Jersey?
No, I don't know why everyone would want to leave. It seems nice. I don't know.
You need to get there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I used to, live really close to it. Some of my favorite people live in New Jersey. So, but it always makes the examples all the time. So I probably fell into that. But, well, thank you, Lisa, for a robust conversation. And we'll finish it up and see what Julia has to say about context. And hopefully people found this to be helpful.
Yeah, if I could just add one teeny little idea.
Please do.
And I will try to do it quickly. I just think that, this is a wish that I have for more Americans to understand that it does us all good, no matter what our status, social status, financial status. It does us all good if the people who don't have it have an improved and better life. That just lifts up society for everyone. And maybe, sometimes you might not get that thing that you want right away, but it's really for everyone's good. That we give advantages to people who need it most. And I think it costs less in the long run, even if you're like one of those number crunching types. So, try to look at the big picture.
Yeah, case in point is look at all the money that's been spent on the prison industrial complex and just think if that would have been invested in people, there may be someone in there that might have found a cure for cancer.
Exactly.
But you wasted all that talent and paid all that money. And I mean, that's, but your point applies to way more things than just that. So well taken. Thank you, Lisa.
All right. Thank you.
You rock.
Oh, thank you. I do rock. I definitely
You do.
rock.
I'm glad you do. That's why you're on the podcast. I don't just invite any chump on here. You got to bring some juice.
You have to be a specific chump to be on this podcast.
See you next week.
Bye.
Friends, this concludes the second part. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, we have a very exciting interview today. It's a new interview, and it'll be a four-parter, and it's one we've been talking about for a really long time, and it has to do with how does athletic recruitment work at Division III schools? What does it look like? What's the process? What's the steps involved in that? And this will be two people I'll be interviewing. Justin Doty, who is the Dean of Admission at Trinity University in San Antonio, and he had a great idea, which is, Mark, how about I do it with my athletic liaison? And I've said, absolutely. So Paul McGinlay will be joining him, and the three of us will have a lengthy conversation on everything you really need to know about Division III athletic recruitment. So, friends, I'm really excited today. I'm here with Justin Doty and Paul McGinlay from Trinity University. Welcome, Paul. Welcome, Justin.
Great to be here. Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, we're going to get a little bit more into our content in a second, but I'll tell you how I met Justin. We had done a spotlight on Trinity University maybe a year and a half ago, and one day I looked at my phone and I saw a number that said San Antonio, and I was like, do I answer this or is this a solicitation call? And I chose to answer it, and you remember that call probably, Justin? You were calling me.
I definitely remember. I appreciate you picking up.
Yeah, and Justin basically called to, well, I'll let you say you had heard the spotlight and you want to share your thoughts?
I loved it. I mean, and I was talking to Paul about it. I mean, just after listening to it, called you, Mark, and I was just thinking you nailed it. I mean, in terms of just the essence and who we are, and I just thought you did an incredible job. And so, yeah, appreciate you covering all the unique aspects.
Well, thank you for that. And our listeners, if you're either a new listener or you haven't heard that, I really want to urge you to kind of see that as a part one and this as a part two. So go back and listen to that. You just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and put Trinity in the search bar and it'll pull up for you and listen to it. So Justin and I got to talking and I was like, I really want you to come on, but we've just kind of done a deeper dive into Trinity. So what would be a topic that would be of interest to you? And we brainstormed and Justin said, well, how would you feel about talking about the D3 athletic process? I think we're doing some pretty cool things here at Trinity. And I've got a fantastic guy, Paul, who could accompany me. And I was like, bingo. And so that was last summer, but this was on me. It just took me a while to get back to you to kind of nail the details down today.
No worries. Yeah, it's been a year in the making.
Exactly. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But our regular listeners know I always like to have our thought leaders share their backgrounds, jobs they've had, their educational experience, just so you have some context when you hear them speak. So I'll let you decide who goes first, but I'd love to hear your backgrounds, guys.
Sounds great. Yeah, sounds good. Well, my background will be fairly brief in the sense that this is the only institution that I've worked. And so I actually got to Trinity in 2000 and found myself as an eager admissions counselor. And Mark, you talked about back in the day traveling, and that was where my passion was, is recruitment and travel and less application reading, but that was part of the job. And 22 years later, find myself serving as Dean of Admissions here at the university. I have loved the experience. The last couple decades, just feel like I've been drinking the Trinity Kool-Aid, just really, really believe in this place. When I first arrived at Trinity, this is where Paul enters the picture. One of the other hats I was wearing was athletic liaison.
Sure.
And so looking back now, honestly, that was a pretty good way to cut my teeth in the profession, because I was working with 18 sports, and almost like admissions counselor by day and athletic liaison by night. And then we finally got smarter as years went on, and we now have a full-time, coordinator of athletic recruitment that's based in the admissions office and works really closely with Paul. But yeah, Paul and I go back to that era of early 2000s. So it's been a wonderful ride at Trinity.
Yeah, I beat Justin by 9 years. I arrived in 1991, originally from England, educated in London, and was hired by Dr. Calgard, who was the then president of Trinity, in 1991 as a young 28-year-old head coach. So they took a leap of faith on me, and I figured as a head coach, I wanted to cut my teeth somewhere. This was one of a few Division III schools in Texas, and I thought, well, everything that's ahead in the program is going to be down to me. So it was a great opportunity to get a great start. And 32 years later, Mark, here I am sitting in front of you, and I would think that I would be one of the longest-serving coaches at Trinity, but there are two others that have spent more time here. So it's been a fantastic place, and as Justin pointed out, it's been our home collectively for about 50 years between us. So we've got a lot of knowledge about the place, but we also have a lot of love for it.
Well, I always say, you can look at retention for not just admissions, but any career as a good indication of a place that's doing something right. So, because both of you, I'm sure, would have had plenty of opportunities to go elsewhere. And the fact that you've stayed 22 years, 31 years, and as Paul said, I'm not even the most senior coach.
Yeah.
So, Paul, has your role changed at all in that time? Have you been soccer coach the whole time?
Yeah.
Athletic liaison. Talk to us about that.
Well, first off, I was hired as the head men's soccer coach in 91, and I had the position, much like every other coach. We would have interaction with the admissions office on a case-by-case basis as needed. And when Justin arrived in 2000, we put our heads together and tried to solve the process for the rest of the coaches, and then try and develop a relationship with admissions where we basically played on the same team. I wouldn't say it was adversarial prior to that, but we both felt that it could be better. And, it's hard to even imagine that we're sitting here 2 decades on, still trying to refine a process that we started a long time ago. But I've enjoyed the relationship, not just with athletics, but, and we were discussing earlier, is my position athletic liaison to admissions or admissions liaison to athletics? We're still not quite sure of that.
Still haven't figured that out.
But it's been a relationship based on trust and hard work and having common goals of retaining the students that we're able to secure at Trinity. And I think each year we just look at it that it's better than the last. And even during the COVID years that we've gone through, we put our heads together and muddled through it with 2 tremendous classes. Both in terms of academics and athletics. So I think if we've gone through that successfully, I think next year should be a little bit easier.
Sounds great. Well, we're going to be talking a lot of athletics, but I do think it would be helpful to talk about some of the unique aspects of Trinity. A lot of people will not have heard that spotlight, and even if they did, let's face it, our minds all need a reminder. So much information coming at us. So why don't you just give an overview of who Trinity is, because I think that will help sort of color and frame a lot of our conversation about D3 athletics.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to take the lead, and, kind of a 50,000 foot level view probably makes sense to start with size. We're about 2,600 undergrad. We honestly, and we've been that size for many, many years. We don't have any intention of growing or shrinking. I feel like we have kind of hit the sweet spot. I mean, it tends to be a little larger than a lot of liberal arts institutions across the country. Certainly not an enormous school by any stretch. But when you talk to Trinity students, a lot of them will say it doesn't feel claustrophobic. It doesn't feel like you're bumping into the same people, but it's certainly not so big where you feel like you're slipping through cracks or anything like that. So get to know faculty extremely well, your coaches and staff and fellow students. So just a lot of opportunities as far as size. Location, we're sitting in San Antonio, and San Antonio is an amazing city. It is, believe it or not, the 7th largest city in the U.S. at this point. And I think, honestly, if you talk to any locals, no one believes that stat. I mean, it's just, it doesn't really feel like the 7th largest. I mean, it's more laid back. It's very friendly. It's very cultural, historic. But there's just so many things to do. I mean, we see San Antonio as kind of the laboratory, I would say, for our students for research and internships and service and social outlets. And then the structure, Mark, we were talking about this earlier. Academically, this is an interesting place too. I mean, you'll hear people refer to Trinity as this like hybrid liberal arts institution. And I didn't quite fully understand what that meant until I got here. And so Trinity has this interesting like full array of humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, the arts, that you would find at any liberal arts college. And then we layer in professional programs. And so we have a nationally accredited School of Business. We have a nationally ranked engineering program, computer science. Trinity actually had the first computer science major in Texas. So really well-established program there. Communication, education. So it's interesting like to weave all that in. And you'll hear people say that academically, Trinity doesn't really operate in silos. And so it's refreshing to like, you can easily navigate, seamlessly between different disciplines. And then I was going to mention resources too as a distinction. So Mark, you nailed this in the college spotlight of Trinity. Just endowment. We're sitting at $1.7 billion for 2,600 students, which is quite unusual. So that kind of puts us in the like top 35 endowment per student. But it's been really nice to see how those funds are used, and how that translates to the student experience, and what we're doing with the infrastructure of campus, and just the internships, the research, the scholarships, the financial aid. So to me, those are, and I know we'll talk about students in a little bit, but those are some of the hallmark distinctions, I feel like.
I think a School of Business also, right?
Yeah, the Nidor School of Business. If I didn't mention that, my apologies. Yeah, the Nidor School of Business. So, yeah, pretty awesome professional tracks.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, for our recommended resource for episode 267, I'm doing something I've never ever done before. I'm giving you 4 resources, not 1. So I'm not going to make this an hour segment, so literally I'm just touching on them now. And this is what I love about having a Monday episode. I'll go into more detail on Monday. First, we have studentaid.gov. Loan forgiveness is up right now, and if you've got a student that's eligible, they need to go to studentaid.gov. Friends, a lot of people are filling out the CSS profile right now, and I gave you a good source a few weeks ago for that, but I've come across a fantastic frequently asked question video with 4 admission officers, 4 financial aid officers, and I've been sending it to all the families I'm working with. They're finding it very helpful, so I'm putting that in the show notes as well. Frequently asked question on the CSS profile. And then, friends, our regular listeners know on Monday's episode on 264, when I first wrote out the 3 must-read books I felt you need to read to really understand how the sausage is made, I said there's one that I'm having a really hard time keeping off the list, but I'm going to tease you and roll it out 10 days later. So I have to share it with you now. And that book is called Creating a Class by the sociologist and researcher Mitchell Stevens. And I'll have much more to say of that book on Monday. And finally, how can I not mention the classic book, The Gatekeepers by Jock Steinberg? I know we've referred it before, but I just feel slimy, guilty, like not bringing that book up in any conversation on this topic. So I have a lot more to say about all of those. I had to give you 4 because studentaid.gov loan forgiveness is totally time sensitive, and the CSS profile FAQ video is incredibly time sensitive because people are completing that right now. And then I promised you another one, and then you know me, I just had to throw the gatekeeper. So if you're curious about all these, on Monday I'll go into more depth. We'll now return to my interview with Justin Doty and Paul McGinlay on what you need to know about recruiting and admissions at Division III schools. Yeah, the reason I was so passionate when I was doing the spotlight on your endowment is because I've worked in 2 institutions. I worked for a college with like no endowment, and then I worked for a boarding school with, really high endowment per student. And I saw like night and day difference that it makes for private institutions, when you have the kinds of resources that you can pay your people well, you can have generous financial aid, you can just have all kinds of different ways in which you can support students. So, and I also know just how atypical that is. Like you say, 1.7 billion for under 2,600 students. I mean, there's a lot of resources per student. You can keep your classes small. It's just a lot you can do. Sure. And so I'm glad that you definitely highlighted that. And that was a great summary. So we're going to transition to athletics. Our topic today is how does the athletic recruitment process work at D3 schools? Paul, I'd like you to start by, you referred to, are you the admissions athletic, liaison to athletics, athletic liaison to admissions? I'm sure we have some listeners that are not sure what that role entails. Can you explain it, just what exactly you do in that role?
Sure. Yeah, we have 18 sports, Mark, 9 men, 9 women at the university that we sponsor. And each of those head coaches are accompanied by full-time assistant coaches who have 2 primary roles, really. Obviously, one is coaching the team, and the other one is recruitment to the team. So I have weekly meetings with our coordinator of athletic recruitment, and we keep each other updated on floors and ceilings of how many students that we expect to have in each class, what the academic profile of the class looks like. And what we found historically, and this is working with Justin as well as our new coordinator, is that the athletic recruitment and the admissions recruitment run parallel. The staff are looking for the same students. Our athletic staff are looking for the same students as the university is looking. And we've got so much history and tradition with the coaches, with longevity with the coaches. I said, I've been here 32 years and I'm third on the list. Wow. And many of the coaches have been here at least a couple of decades. And then we've also filled in with alumni who have returned into coaching positions. So I think these two factors here, longevity and the relationship with our alumni, those two factors have contributed to a great relationship between athletic recruitment and the admissions office. I know Justin at times has visited conferences and had discussions with other peers, and they haven't quite been as complimentary about the relationship between admissions and athletics. But we really feel like it's a real hand-in-glove relationship with both of us supporting the same goals, which is admission and retention.
So are you having conversations, with coaches primarily about the athletic level that the players are at, where people are in the admission process, academically, whether or not you feel they'll be able to get through the admission process? Are you educating coaches on sort of what a good Trinity applicant is like from an admission standpoint? I mean, go into some of the details on that, because I think that's important.
I think over time, Mark, there's been an educational process both for the athletic staff from admissions and vice versa, that we feel very well versed that we're bringing an applicant to the table that we know is admissible and that we can retain at Trinity. And we get as excited about a top academic kid as we do a top athlete. And we do have weekly interaction to make sure that we're monitoring the class, because since Justin and I first embarked on this 20 years ago, our numbers have been unbelievably consistent, that we bring in about 25% of the class. I think maybe 22 at a low, 26 at a high, but we're always in those, pretty consistent with those numbers. And that's across any and every year. So it is crafted. This is not an arbitrary throw against the wall and see what sticks. We craft each class together that benefits the sport, and then it benefits the admissions office, that they can worry about the other 75%, knowing that you can almost bank 25% as student athletes. So it's not accidental. I think we have a boutique operation to it, that we are taking students case by case and building a class athletically that we're proud of and that can compete on the national stage. And then we're retaining them for 4 years, and then they graduate and move on and become, meaningful members of society, whatever they go into. So I've only known Trinity as a head coach, and so I don't really have an accurate comparison to other schools about how they go through the process athletically and academically. But I do know that we do have a special relationship with admissions, and the weekly contact and the trust in each other, that we're bringing the right student athletes to the table. That's just been built up over time.
Right, and I would say too, Mark, it gets pretty granular on a student athlete basis with our coordinator in admissions. So she is doing a fantastic job where she works with each coach on specific students. So they'll bring to the table every single week, and what do you think about this student? And here's some transcripts to look at, and here's someone I've identified, and so she does a lot of kind of advising as far as admission and potential merit aid if that's entering the picture. But Paul has been great about then coming to kind of staff meetings and kind of sharing out, okay, here's what's happening at a higher level, and then our coordinator is kind of getting into the weeds, I would say, with a lot of these cases.
And there are going to be student athletes that are on the margins.
Sure.
And building a case for them as someone that we would think would be a great fit for Trinity. We're filling in some of the gaps that might not appear on the application process. Yeah. And the athletic recruitment at Division, well, certainly at Trinity, it's the lifeblood of our program. And so, we want to attract kids that will be here for 4 years, that are not going to come and just have a cup of coffee with us in the fall, but be with us for the duration of their athletic career. So we have the same goal, admission and retention, and it's just been a fantastic relationship.
Yeah, that 22 to 26% numbers pretty consistent with what I hear for other schools that are Division III or smaller Division I schools in terms of, sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 20, and that 20 to 30 range seems pretty typical for schools your size, because if you're going to field a lot of teams, you need a lot of different people. But here's a really tough question, but I think our listeners would be interested in this. So when you said 22 to 26, you're talking about the percentage of students in the student body that play a varsity sport. Am I correct?
Correct.
So this is the question. What percentage of students do you think would not have gotten admitted without an athletic hook, without the fact that they were bringing – I told you it was going to be tough. and I'm not expecting you to say, 9.7 or 13.1, right. But it's more of a gut level anecdote, because I just think our listeners would find that interesting.
Right.
Well, if I was to be, you're quite accurate when you say 9.1. I would say maybe 1 in 10 would be someone that we would present a case for.
Sure.
And they would have to be a superior athletic candidate to bring them to the table to admissions.
Because I'm sure within that 22 to 26%, there's probably some walk-ons that play varsity sport that are walk-ons. Am I correct?
Less so
Really?
by the year. Yeah. But that's really across the board. I mean, most, if not all, of our student athletes that deposit at Trinity by the May 1st deadline have been recruited to play in each of the programs, and our rosters now are pretty much across the board at a maximum. And of course, this COVID year, we've got some seniors that have come back for one more year, which clogs the rosters a little bit, but that will flush out, over time. So we're really operating at maximum capacity right now, which makes the next year's class even more targeted. That we're not going after the masses. Again, I keep going back to this boutique operation. We're just looking for a small number of talented student athletes that fit our profile and are really the perfect match is what we're looking for.
Friends, this completes the first half. I hope you'll join us next week for the second part. Friends, on Monday's episode, we have our announcement section. I'm going to primarily focus on a couple things. I'm going to go more in depth on these 4 recommended resources, which I just touched on in today's episode. And I'm also going to tell you another thing that's grinding my gears. I told you that on last Monday's episode. And then we introduce a whole brand new interview. It is with Dr. Martha Saunders. This is our second college president that we have interviewed on Your College Bound Kid. And you get that high-level view of what's going on in higher ed. It'll be part 1 of a 2-parter, and Dr. Martha Saunders is the president of the University of West Florida. So we hope you will join us on Monday. And friends, remember, it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That will determine your career trajectory. See you on Monday, everybody. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.